"Don't get in the car!" shouted the mechanic. Seconds later, the car exploded and the millionaire was saved. Michael Torres had never imagined that a simple intuition could save someone's life and transform his own existence forever. On that ordinary Tuesday morning, the 30-year-old mechanic was finishing an emergency service call at the headquarters of Nextech Industries, one of the largest technology companies in the city, when his trained eyes noticed something that made his blood run cold. As he walked toward his old truck parked in the visitor's lot, he saw an elegant woman in a tight blue dress approaching a stunning red Ferrari, her high heels clicking against the polished pavement with confidence and urgency. But it wasn't the woman or the luxury car that captured Michael's attention. It was the small pool of liquid forming beneath the vehicle, the faint smell of gasoline mixed with something chemical that his years of experience immediately identified as dangerous, and an almost imperceptible hissing sound that most people would never have noticed. Without thinking twice, his survival instinct and professional knowledge took over his body. Michael dropped his toolbox and ran toward the woman with a desperation he had never felt before, his grease-stained coveralls flapping as his work boots pounded against the ground. He could see her manicured hand reaching for the door handle, her attention focused on the phone pressed against her ear, completely oblivious to the imminent danger lurking beneath her $50,000 vehicle. The mechanic's voice erupted from his throat with a force that surprised even himself, a raw and primal scream that cut through the morning air like a blade. His warning echoed across the parking lot, causing dozens of employees who were entering the building to stop and look toward the scene with curiosity and confusion. The woman in the blue dress froze, her hand inches from the door, her green eyes widening as she turned to see this stranger running toward her with his arms waving frantically in the air. Before anyone could fully process what was happening, before security guards could react to what seemed like an assault in progress, before the woman could decide whether to run or call for help, the unthinkable occurred. The red Ferrari erupted in a massive ball of fire and twisted metal. The explosion so powerful, it shattered windows on the first 3 floors of the Nextech building and sent a shockwave that knocked several onlookers to the ground. The woman had stumbled backward at Michael's warning, falling onto the pavement just seconds before her car became an inferno, the heat so intense that everyone within 50 feet could feel it searing their skin. Pieces of the vehicle rained down across the parking lot like deadly confetti, and thick black smoke billowed into the clear morning sky, visible for miles around. Michael had thrown himself over the woman instinctively, shielding her body with his own as debris clattered around them, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. As the initial shock faded and the wail of approaching sirens filled the air, Michael helped the trembling woman to her feet, both of them covered in dust, but miraculously uninjured. Around them, employees poured from the building, some recording with their phones, others calling emergency services, all of them witnesses to the miracle that had just unfolded before their eyes. The woman stared at the burning wreckage of her Ferrari, then at the mechanic who had saved her life, tears streaming down her face as she struggled to find words adequate for the moment. Michael Torres, a simple mechanic who lived paycheck to paycheck in a modest apartment across town, had become a hero in the span of 30 seconds. Though he didn't feel like one as he stood there shaking, the reality of what had almost happened finally beginning to sink in. What neither of them knew in that moment was that this explosion would detonate something far more powerful than fire and metal. It would ignite a chain of events that would transform both of their lives in ways neither could possibly imagine. If this story has captured your attention and you want to see how Michael's life changes after this incredible act of courage, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you never miss an inspiring story. Also, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. We love connecting with viewers from around the world and hearing your thoughts on these amazing real-life moments. Victoria Ashford was not accustomed to feeling vulnerable, and as paramedics checked her vital signs while police investigators swarmed the smoking remains of her Ferrari, the 32-year-old CEO of Nextech Industries found herself experiencing an unfamiliar cocktail of emotions that her usual composure could not contain. She had built her technology empire from the ground up after inheriting a modest software company from her late father, transforming it through sheer determination and brilliant strategic decisions into a billion-dollar corporation that employed over 3,000 people across 15 countries. Victoria was known throughout the industry as the Iron Lady, a nickname she had earned through her ruthless negotiating tactics, her refusal to accept failure, and her legendary ability to remain calm and calculating even in the most high-pressure situations. But today, sitting on the back of an ambulance with a shock blanket wrapped around her shoulders and the acrid smell of burning metal filling her nostrils, Victoria Ashford felt something she hadn't experienced in years: genuine fear and an overwhelming sense of gratitude toward a complete stranger. Her mind raced through the implications of what had just occurred, the business side of her brain already analyzing the situation even as her hands continued to tremble uncontrollably. Someone had tried to kill her, that much was obvious. Cars didn't simply explode in modern parking lots, especially not vehicles that received meticulous maintenance from the most expensive mechanics in the city. Victoria thought about the hostile takeover bid she had been fighting for the past 6 months. The aggressive competitor who had publicly vowed to destroy her company, the disgruntled former executive she had fired for embezzlement who had sent threatening emails before disappearing. The list of people who might want her dead was disturbingly long for someone who had dedicated her life to innovation and progress. And this realization made her feel suddenly exposed and unsafe in a world she had always controlled with confidence. As detectives asked her questions about potential enemies and recent threats, Victoria's eyes kept drifting back to the mechanic who sat on a nearby bench, giving his own statement to another officer. Michael Torres looked so ordinary, so wonderfully normal, compared to the parade of ambitious executives and calculating business partners who populated Victoria's daily existence. His coveralls were genuinely stained from honest work, not designer distressed clothing meant to look authentic while costing thousands of dollars. His calloused hands spoke of years of manual labor, of fixing things that were broken and making them work again, a concept that felt almost quaint in Victoria's world of planned obsolescence and quarterly profit margins. She watched as he ran those same hands through his dark hair, clearly uncomfortable with all the attention, declining interviews from news reporters who had already begun to arrive with their cameras and microphones. There was something refreshing about his discomfort with the spotlight, his obvious desire to simply finish his job and return to his normal life, as if saving someone from a car bomb was just another task to check off his daily list. Victoria realized she couldn't remember the last time she had met someone who didn't want something from her, who hadn't approached her with an agenda or a pitch or a carefully rehearsed request for funding or partnership. As the paramedics finally cleared her to leave and her assistant arrived with a company car and a fresh change of clothes, Victoria made a decision that would set everything in motion. She walked over to Michael before her security team could whisk her away to the safety of her executive suite, her heels clicking against the pavement with the same confidence they had before the explosion, though now tempered with a new awareness of life's fragility. The mechanic stood when he saw her approaching, his posture respectful but not subservient, his brown eyes meeting hers with a directness that was both surprising and appealing. Victoria extended her hand, felt the rough warmth of his palm against hers, and spoke the words that would change both of their destinies. She thanked him with a sincerity that caught them both off guard, her voice cracking slightly as she acknowledged that she owed him her life, that without his quick thinking and selfless action, she would be nothing more than a tragic headline in tomorrow's business section. She asked for his contact information, promising that Nextech would compensate him appropriately for his heroism, though they both knew that no amount of money could truly repay the debt she now owed. Michael seemed uncomfortable with the idea of compensation, insisting he had only done what anyone would do in that situation, though they both knew that wasn't true. Most people would have frozen, hesitated, or simply not noticed the danger at all. Victoria pressed a business card into his hand anyway, her fingers lingering for just a moment longer than necessary, and told him she would be in touch very soon. As her security detail finally succeeded in guiding her toward the waiting vehicle, Victoria looked back one more time at the humble mechanic standing amid the chaos, and she felt something she hadn't experienced in her entire adult life, a genuine desire to know someone for who they were rather than what they could do for her business. The explosion that morning had destroyed her car and nearly ended her life, but it had also blown apart the carefully constructed walls she had built around her heart, creating an opening for something unexpected to enter. Victoria Ashford was a woman who solved problems, who analyzed situations and implemented solutions with ruthless efficiency, and as she was driven away from the scene, her mind was already formulating a plan that would fulfill her debt to Michael, while also perhaps filling a void in her life she hadn't even known existed. Michael Torres returned to his small auto repair shop in the industrial district of the city, his mind still reeling from the morning's events, even as his hands automatically resumed their familiar work on a customer's transmission. The shop had belonged to his father before him, a legacy of grease-stained floors and honest labor that stretched back 3 decades, and Michael had inherited it 5 years ago when a heart attack had taken his father too early and too suddenly. The business barely turned a profit most months, squeezed between the corporate chain repair shops with their slick marketing and the dealerships with their certified technicians, but Michael refused to compromise on quality or integrity just to chase easier money. His father had taught him that a man's reputation was built on the work of his hands and the honesty of his words. Lessons that seemed increasingly quaint in a world that valued profit margins over principles and efficiency over excellence. As he talked down bolts and calibrated systems, Michael couldn't stop thinking about the woman in the blue dress, about the terror in her green eyes when she realized how close she had come to death, about the genuine gratitude in her voice when she thanked him. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor that would begin to shift the trajectory of Michael's ordinary existence. A sleek, black town car pulled up in front of his modest shop, looking as out of place among the industrial buildings and chain-link fences as a diamond at a yard sale. From the vehicle emerged a man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase, his polished shoes already collecting dust from the unpaved area in front of Michael's garage. The visitor introduced himself as Richard Chen, Victoria Ashford's personal attorney, and he had come with a proposal that made Michael's head spin. Nextech Industries wanted to award him a reward of $50,000 for his heroic actions, a sum that represented more money than Michael typically earned in an entire year of 12-hour days and constant hustle. Chen explained that the company also wanted to offer Michael a contract to service all of Nextech's company vehicles, a fleet of over 200 cars and trucks that would provide a steady, reliable income stream that could transform his struggling business. The attorney laid out documents on Michael's cluttered desk, pointing to signature lines and explaining terms with the casual confidence of someone who negotiated deals worth millions every single day. Michael stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language, his oil-stained fingers hovering over the pen that Chen offered with an encouraging smile. The logical part of his brain screamed at him to sign immediately, to grab this life-changing opportunity with both hands before someone realized they had made a mistake and withdrew the offer. But something about the situation felt wrong to Michael. Too convenient and too generous for what had simply been the right thing to do in a moment of crisis. He had saved a life because it was the moral choice, not because he expected payment or recognition, and accepting such an extravagant reward felt like it cheapened the act somehow, transforming a moment of pure human decency into a transaction. Michael asked Chen for time to think about the offer, a request that clearly surprised the attorney, who was accustomed to people eagerly accepting whatever opportunities Nextech presented. The lawyer left his card and the contract, telling Michael that Ms. Ashford hoped he would accept but would respect whatever decision he made, though Chen's tone suggested he found the idea of anyone refusing such generosity completely incomprehensible. That evening, Michael sat in his tiny apartment above the shop, eating leftover pizza and wrestling with a decision that felt far more complicated than it should have been. His late father's words echoed in his memory, reminding him that accepting charity was different from accepting fair payment for honest work, and that a man needed to know the difference if he wanted to sleep peacefully at night. Michael looked around his modest living space, at the second-hand furniture and the television that was older than some of his customers' children, at the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter that represented a constant source of stress and anxiety. He thought about what $50,000 could do: pay off his debts, repair the roof of his shop that leaked every time it rained, maybe even allow him to hire an assistant so he wouldn't have to work 7 days a week just to keep the business afloat. The contract for Nextech's fleet would provide the financial stability he had been chasing since taking over the shop, the security that would let him breathe easily for the first time in 5 years. But Michael also thought about Victoria Ashford, about the woman behind the CEO title, about the genuine emotion he had seen in her eyes that morning, and he wondered if accepting this money would create an imbalance between them that would forever define their potential relationship. Michael made his decision in the quiet hours before dawn, when the city was still asleep and only the distant sound of traffic on the highway broke the silence. He would refuse the reward money because it felt too much like payment for saving a life, which was not something that should carry a price tag. But he would accept the contract to service Nextech's vehicles because that was honest work, a fair exchange of his skills and time for reasonable compensation, exactly the kind of business relationship his father had always encouraged. As sunrise painted the eastern sky with shades of orange and pink, Michael called the number on Richard Chen's business card and explained his decision, hearing the surprise and confusion in the attorney's voice as he tried to understand why anyone would turn down free money. Michael asked Chen to convey his gratitude to Ms. Ashford and his willingness to begin servicing the company fleet immediately, but to also make clear that he could not accept the personal reward. When the call ended, Michael felt a sense of peace settle over him, the certainty that he had made the right choice, even if it wasn't the easy one, even if his bank account would disagree with his principles. He had no way of knowing that his decision had just elevated him even further in Victoria Ashford's estimation, or that his refusal of her money would make her more determined than ever to find a way to properly thank the man who had saved her life. Victoria Ashford sat in her minimalist executive office on the 42nd floor of Nextech Tower, staring at the email from Richard Chen with an expression that would have alarmed anyone who knew her well. The CEO who negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking, who had stared down hostile board members and aggressive competitors with ice in her veins, found herself completely thrown off balance by a simple mechanic's refusal of her generous reward. In Victoria's world, everyone had a price, everyone wanted something, and money was the universal language that solved problems and secured loyalties. But Michael Torres had rejected $50,000 as if it were pocket change, accepting only the business contract for work he would actually perform. And this unexpected display of principle had captivated Victoria in a way that surprised and unsettled her. She read Chen's email 3 more times, focusing on the attorney's observation that Michael seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the idea of accepting payment for saving a life. that he viewed heroism as a moral obligation rather than a service deserving compensation. This perspective was so foreign to Victoria's experience that she found herself obsessively analyzing it, trying to understand the mindset of someone who would choose principle over profit. For 3 days, Victoria tried to focus on her usual responsibilities: conference calls with international partners, strategic planning sessions with her executive team, negotiations for a merger that would expand Nextech's reach into Asian markets. But her mind kept drifting back to the parking lot, to those terrifying seconds before the explosion, to the rough warmth of Michael's hand when he helped her to her feet amid the chaos. She found herself reading news articles about the incident, watching the security camera footage that had been leaked to media outlets, pausing the video at the moment when Michael's face showed pure determination as he sprinted toward danger to save a stranger. Victoria had built her success on rational analysis and calculated decisions, but what she was feeling now defied logical explanation. A growing curiosity about Michael Torres that went beyond simple gratitude, a desire to know more about this man who lived in a completely different world than her own. She told herself it was merely appreciation for someone who had performed an extraordinary service, but deep down, Victoria recognized the stirrings of something more complex and potentially dangerous to the carefully ordered life she had constructed. The opportunity for deeper connection came when Victoria decided to personally inspect the mechanic's shop before officially awarding the fleet contract, a decision she justified as standard due diligence, but which her assistant correctly identified as highly unusual behavior for a CEO. Victoria arrived at Torres Auto Repair on a Friday afternoon, trading her usual chauffeur-driven Mercedes for a more modest company sedan that wouldn't draw excessive attention in the industrial neighborhood. The shop was exactly what she had imagined: small, cluttered with tools and parts, smelling of motor oil and honest labor, completely unpretentious in a way that felt almost revolutionary to someone who spent her days in glass towers and boardrooms. Michael was under a car when she arrived, his legs visible beneath an old pickup truck, the sound of metal on metal echoing through the garage as he worked. Victoria announced her presence by clearing her throat, then watched with fascination as Michael rolled out from under the vehicle, his face showing surprise that quickly transformed into something that might have been pleasure before his professional demeanor reasserted itself. They talked for over an hour, initially about the fleet contract and the logistics of servicing Nextech's vehicles, but the conversation naturally evolved into something more personal and unexpected. Michael gave her a tour of his modest operation, explaining his philosophy of thorough diagnostics and quality repairs rather than quick fixes and maximum profits, showing her the memorial wall where photos of his father working in this same garage created a timeline of family dedication and honest craftsmanship. Victoria found herself genuinely interested in the technical details he shared, asking questions about automotive systems and repair methodologies that went far beyond simple politeness, discovering that there was something satisfying about understanding how physical things worked, rather than just the abstract systems and algorithms that dominated her professional life. Michael, in turn, seemed to relax as he talked about his work, his passion for problem-solving and fixing things evident in every gesture and explanation, and Victoria realized that they shared more common ground than their different worlds would suggest. They were both people who saw problems and felt compelled to find solutions, whether those problems involved faulty transmissions or struggling market shares. As the afternoon stretched toward evening and the light slanting through the garage windows turned golden, Victoria made a decision that would have shocked her board of directors and probably violated several unwritten rules about maintaining professional boundaries. She asked Michael if he would like to have dinner with her, not as a CEO thanking an employee or a wealthy woman repaying a debt, but simply as two people getting to know each other better. The invitation hung in the air between them, loaded with implications they both recognized but neither fully acknowledged. Michael hesitated, his expression showing the internal debate between attraction and awareness of the vast differences in their circumstances, between desire and the practical knowledge that people from their separate worlds rarely mixed successfully. But then he smiled, that genuine expression that Victoria had first seen in the parking lot when he was more concerned with her safety than his own recognition, and he accepted her invitation with a simple nod that felt like the most honest communication Victoria had experienced in years. As they walked toward her car to drive to a nearby restaurant, Victoria felt a flutter of nervousness that was completely foreign to her usual confident demeanor, and she realized that Michael Torres had already changed her life in ways that extended far beyond saving it from an explosion. The restaurant Michael chose for their dinner surprised Victoria in all the right ways, a small family-owned Mexican place tucked into a strip mall, where the aroma of fresh tortillas and simmering spices filled the air, and colorful papel picado decorations hung from the ceiling like festive prayers. It was the antithesis of the Michelin-starred establishments, where Victoria typically conducted her business dinners, places where a single meal cost more than some people's weekly groceries, and where the atmosphere was hushed and reverential. Here, mariachi music played from speakers mounted in the corners. Children laughed at nearby tables, and the owner greeted Michael by name with a warmth that spoke of years of loyal patronage. Victoria felt conspicuously overdressed in her designer business casual outfit, but she also felt something she hadn't experienced in her expensive restaurants, a sense of authentic life being lived, of real community existing beyond transactions and networking opportunities. As they settled into a worn booth with cracked vinyl seats, Victoria realized she couldn't remember the last time she had eaten somewhere that didn't require reservations weeks in advance or proof of her platinum credit card. Their conversation flowed with surprising ease, given the vast differences in their backgrounds and daily experiences. Michael talked about growing up in the working-class neighborhood where his shop was located, about helping his father in the garage since he was old enough to hold a wrench, about the simple satisfaction of taking something broken and making it function again. He spoke of his mother, who had passed away when he was 14, of how his father had raised him alone while building the business, of the values of hard work and integrity that had been hammered into him through example rather than lecture. Victoria found herself sharing stories she rarely told anyone about her own father, who had founded the company she now led, about the pressure of transforming his modest legacy into something monumental, about the loneliness that came with success, and the isolation of always being the smartest person in the room. She admitted that she couldn't remember the last time she had just talked to someone without calculating angles or anticipating their agenda, that the constant strategizing and manipulation required by her position had become so automatic she sometimes forgot how to simply be human. Michael listened with an attention that felt rare and precious, not interrupting or trying to fix her problems, just creating space for her words and responding with thoughtful observations that showed he actually heard what she was saying. As plates of enchiladas and tamales arrived at their table, steam rising with the promise of simple pleasures, Victoria asked Michael why he had really refused the $50,000 reward, pressing past his initial explanation about principle to understand the deeper motivation. Michael set down his fork and looked at her with those honest brown eyes, explaining that accepting money for saving a life would have changed the fundamental nature of what he had done, transforming a moral imperative into a service rendered and paid for. He told her about his father's teachings regarding the difference between charity and earned income, about how a man needed to be able to look at himself in the mirror and know that what he had came from his own efforts and skills rather than windfalls and luck. But then Michael added something that made Victoria's heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with the previous week's explosion. He said that he also wanted to be able to face Victoria as an equal rather than as someone who owed him a debt, that accepting the money would have created an imbalance that might have prevented what was happening right now. This simple dinner between two people discovering they enjoyed each other's company. The admission was vulnerable and honest in a way that Victoria found both terrifying and exhilarating. And she realized that Michael had been thinking about her just as much as she had been thinking about him since that fateful morning. The evening ended in the parking lot outside the restaurant as streetlights flickered to life and the city settled into its nighttime rhythm of distant sirens and passing cars. Victoria leaned against her sedan, reluctant to end the connection they had forged over Mexican food and honest conversation, feeling like Cinderella at midnight, except that she was the one with the castle and responsibilities waiting for her return. Michael stood close enough that she could smell motor oil and soap on his skin, a combination that shouldn't have been attractive, but somehow absolutely was. And for a long moment they just looked at each other while the world continued around them. Victoria surprised herself by admitting that she wanted to see him again, not as a CEO checking on a contractor or a grateful survivor repaying a debt, but simply as a woman interested in a man who made her feel things she had forgotten were possible. Michael's response was to step closer and gently touch her cheek with his calloused hand, a gesture so tender it made Victoria's eyes sting with unexpected emotion, and he said that he would like nothing more than to explore whatever was developing between them, consequences and complications be damned. They exchanged personal phone numbers rather than business contacts, a small act that felt monumentally significant, and as Victoria drove home through the city lights, she couldn't stop smiling, despite knowing that she was heading toward territory that was far more dangerous than any car bomb. While romance blossomed in unexpected places, Detective Sarah Morrison was systematically unraveling the threads of attempted murder that had brought Victoria and Michael together in such dramatic fashion. The veteran investigator sat in her cluttered office at police headquarters, surrounded by evidence photos and forensic reports that painted a disturbing picture of premeditation and technical sophistication. The bomb that had destroyed Victoria's Ferrari had been professionally constructed using commercial explosives and a trigger mechanism that suggested military or demolition expertise rather than amateur enthusiasm. Forensic analysis revealed that the device had been planted sometime during the previous night, attached to the fuel system with precision that indicated detailed knowledge of the vehicle's design and the target's routine schedule. Detective Morrison had seen many attempted murders during her 20-year career, but something about this case troubled her beyond the usual outrage at violent crime. There was a level of planning and resource commitment that suggested this was not a crime of passion or impulsive revenge, but rather a calculated assassination by someone with significant means and serious motivation. The list of potential suspects Victoria had provided was extensive and disturbing, reading like a rogues gallery of corporate warfare and personal vendettas accumulated during her meteoric rise to the top of the technology industry. There was Marcus Blackwood, the aggressive competitor who had publicly sworn to destroy Nextech after Victoria had outmaneuvered him in a bidding war for a crucial software patent. There was Jennifer Chen, the former chief financial officer Victoria had fired and prosecuted for embezzling millions from the company, who had sent threatening emails before disappearing into the legal system. There was her cousin David Ashford, who felt he deserved control of the company their mutual grandfather had founded and who had contested Victoria's leadership through lawsuits and board challenges. Beyond these obvious candidates were disgruntled investors who had lost money on bad bets, foreign competitors whose markets Victoria had disrupted with innovative products, and even a stalker who had been sending disturbing letters to Victoria's office for the past year. Detective Morrison methodically worked through each possibility, running background checks and establishing alibis, following the money trails and communication records that might lead to whoever had decided Victoria Ashford needed to die. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source when a junior detective noticed something odd in the security footage from Nextech's parking lot. The cameras showed a utility van with municipal markings entering the executive parking area at 2:30 in the morning on the night before the explosion, staying for approximately 17 minutes before departing. The van's license plates were registered to the city's water department, but when Morrison contacted them, they had no record of any service call or maintenance work at that location on that date. Enhanced analysis of the footage revealed that while the van's exterior markings were convincing, subtle details were wrong. The font on the door logo slightly off, the color of the municipal seal not quite matching official vehicles, small discrepancies that would only be noticed under careful scrutiny. Morrison obtained warrants and tracked down the van itself, abandoned in an industrial area across town, wiped clean of fingerprints but still containing trace evidence that forensic technicians were currently analyzing. The discovery confirmed what Morrison had suspected. This was a professional hit, executed by someone with resources and connections, someone who had taken the time to plan carefully and minimize their chances of detection. As the investigation progressed, Morrison felt an increasing urgency to solve the case before the perpetrator tried again. In her experience, people who went to this much trouble to kill someone rarely gave up after a single failed attempt, especially when that failure had been so public and embarrassing. She arranged a meeting with Victoria at Nextech headquarters, bringing her latest findings and a list of security recommendations that would make the CEO's life considerably more restricted, but also significantly safer. Victoria listened to the detective's briefing with the same focused intensity she brought to business presentations, asking sharp questions about evidence and investigative procedures that showed her analytical mind at work, even when discussing her own potential murder. But Morrison noticed something different about Victoria during this meeting, a lightness in her demeanor that seemed out of place given the serious threat to her life, a tendency to smile slightly when she thought no one was watching. The detective had interviewed enough people to recognize the signs of new romance, and she found herself hoping that whoever had captured Victoria's attention wouldn't become collateral damage in the increasingly dangerous situation they were all navigating. As Morrison left the gleaming tower to continue her investigation, she couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. That somewhere in the city, the person who had tried to kill Victoria Ashford was already planning their next move, refining their approach based on lessons learned from their spectacular failure. Victoria's growing relationship with Michael became the subject of intense speculation and gossip within Nextech's executive corridors, where every coffee break conversation seemed to circle back to the unlikely romance between the billionaire CEO and the working-class mechanic. The whispers began when Victoria's assistant noticed her boss smiling at text messages during board meetings, continued when security reported the CEO personally driving to the industrial district multiple evenings per week, and reached a crescendo when someone spotted them having lunch together at a casual diner near Michael's shop. The reaction divided neatly along predictable lines. Some executives viewed the relationship as a charming fairy tale, a humanizing element that made their intimidating boss seem more accessible and real, while others saw it as a dangerous distraction or worse, a calculated public relations move to generate positive publicity after the assassination attempt. Victoria was acutely aware of the speculation, but found herself caring less about others' opinions than she ever had before. A liberation that was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating for someone who had spent her entire career carefully managing her public image and professional reputation. Michael faced his own challenges as news of the relationship spread through his world of auto repair shops and working-class neighborhoods. Some of his longtime customers expressed excitement at the Cinderella story playing out in reverse, joking that Michael had literally saved himself a princess and earned his fairy tale ending through courage and integrity. But others viewed his involvement with Victoria with suspicion and resentment, suggesting that he was abandoning his roots or trying to climb above his proper station, that the relationship could only end badly when the rich woman tired of her charitable project and returned to her own world. The most painful criticism came from his childhood friend Carlos, who had worked alongside Michael in the shop for years, and who now openly questioned whether Michael was being used for publicity purposes, whether Victoria was simply slumming until the novelty wore off and she realized she had nothing in common with a mechanic who would never understand her world of boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions. These conversations hurt Michael more than he wanted to admit, forcing him to confront his own insecurities about the vast gulf between his circumstances and Victoria's, the nagging fear that he was indeed just a temporary distraction rather than a genuine romantic interest. The tension came to a head when Victoria invited Michael to accompany her to a technology industry gala, a black tie affair where she was scheduled to receive an award for innovation and leadership. The invitation terrified Michael in ways that running toward an exploding car had not, confronting him with the reality of Victoria's social world and his own inadequacy to navigate it confidently. He owned exactly one suit, purchased for his father's funeral 5 years ago, and now slightly tight across the shoulders from the physical labor that defined his days. He had never attended an event where dinner cost more than he spent on groceries in a month, where the casual conversation involved stock options and market disruption rather than transmission repairs and brake pad replacements. Victoria sensed his discomfort during the phone call when she extended the invitation, and she made it clear that she wanted him there not as an accessory or a publicity statement, but because she genuinely desired his company during an evening that would otherwise be full of empty networking and superficial conversations with people who wanted something from her. Her vulnerability in admitting that she needed an ally in her own world helped Michael overcome his initial resistance, and he agreed to attend despite his certainty that he would embarrass both of them with his lack of sophistication. The night of the gala, Michael stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the 20th time, feeling like an imposter preparing to infiltrate enemy territory. Victoria had offered to send a stylist and provide a new suit, but he had refused, not out of pride, but from a determination to show up as himself rather than as a manufactured version designed to fit her world. When Victoria's car arrived to collect him, she emerged wearing a stunning silver gown that made her look like moonlight given human form. But what struck Michael most was the genuine joy in her eyes when she saw him, the way she touched his hand and told him he looked perfect exactly as he was. They arrived at the luxury hotel where the gala was being held, and Michael felt every eye turn toward them as they entered the ballroom together, Victoria Ashford and her unexpected companion, the mechanic who had saved her life and apparently captured her heart. The evening tested Michael in ways he had never experienced, navigating conversations with venture capitalists and tech moguls, understanding just enough about business to follow discussions without contributing much, feeling the weight of judgment and curiosity from people who clearly wondered what Victoria saw in someone so ordinary. But Victoria never left his side, her hand frequently finding his, her eyes meeting his across crowded conversations as if to say they were in this together. And Michael realized that he didn't need to belong to her world as long as they could create a space that belonged to both of them. When Victoria accepted her award and used her acceptance speech to publicly acknowledge Michael's heroism and the reminder he had given her about what truly mattered in life, he felt tears prick his eyes and knew that whatever challenges they faced, whatever obstacles their different worlds placed in their path, the connection between them was real and worth fighting for. Detective Morrison's investigation reached a critical turning point when forensic analysis of the abandoned utility van yielded a crucial clue that broke the case wide open. Microscopic paint transfers found on the van's interior matched the custom color of vehicles owned by Titan Industries, Marcus Blackwood's technology conglomerate and Nextech's most aggressive competitor. Further investigation revealed that Blackwood had recently hired a security consultant with a troubling background, former military, expertise in explosives, a history of working in corporate espionage and industrial sabotage. Phone records obtained through warrant showed multiple calls between Blackwood's personal cell phone and the consultant in the weeks leading up to the assassination attempt, including 3 calls on the day before the explosion. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling, painting a picture of a desperate man who had decided that if he couldn't beat Victoria in the marketplace, he would eliminate her entirely. Morrison brought her findings to the district attorney, who agreed they had enough to bring Blackwood in for questioning and to execute search warrants on both Titan Industries and the consultant's known addresses. The operation was planned for maximum surprise and minimum risk, coordinating multiple teams to execute warrants simultaneously before anyone could destroy evidence or flee the jurisdiction. But before Morrison could move forward with the arrests, she received an anonymous tip that changed everything, a burner phone text message containing photographs of documents that showed the conspiracy went deeper than anyone had suspected. The images revealed that Blackwood hadn't acted alone, but had partnered with David Ashford, Victoria's cousin, who had been fighting for control of Nextech for years, combining their resources and grievances into a deadly alliance. The documents outlined a plan where Victoria's death would create chaos at Nextech, allowing Blackwood to swoop in with a hostile takeover bid, while David used his family connection and board relationships to position himself as the stabilizing force who could save the company. It was a sophisticated scheme that would have worked perfectly if not for Michael's intervention and Morrison's dogged investigation. The detective immediately contacted Victoria to warn her that the threat was even closer to home than they had realized, that someone she had trusted despite their differences had actively participated in planning her murder. Victoria received Morrison's call while having dinner with Michael at his apartment, a simple meal of pasta and salad that represented a conscious choice to spend time in his world rather than always pulling him into hers. The news hit her like a physical blow. Corporate rivalry she understood and could respect in its ruthless way, but family betrayal cut deeper than business competition ever could. David was her cousin, someone she had grown up with at family gatherings, whose presence at holiday dinners had been a constant throughout her childhood, even as their relationship soured in adulthood. The knowledge that he had been willing to kill her, to literally end her life for control of a company, revealed a capacity for evil that Victoria had never imagined existing in someone who shared her blood and her grandfather's legacy. Michael held her as she processed the information, offering no platitudes or empty reassurances, just his solid presence and the quiet strength that had first attracted her to him. Together, they listened as Detective Morrison outlined her plan. Rather than arrest the conspirators immediately, she wanted to set a trap that would catch them in the act of a second attempt, providing irrefutable evidence that would guarantee convictions and long prison sentences. The plan required Victoria to act as bait, a role that made Michael's blood run cold, even as Victoria accepted it with the calculated courage that had built her empire. Morrison explained that they had discovered through intercepted communications that Blackwood and David were planning another attempt during an upcoming technology conference where Victoria was scheduled to give the keynote address. The conspirators had learned from their first failure, and this time they planned something more subtle than a car bomb, a staged accident during Victoria's presentation, a technical malfunction that would look like tragic chance rather than deliberate murder. The detectives' team would be in position to intervene before any real danger materialized, but Victoria would need to maintain her normal schedule and show no sign that she knew about the plot, effectively trusting her life to law enforcement's ability to protect her. Michael argued vehemently against the plan, unable to bear the thought of Victoria deliberately walking into danger, his protective instincts overwhelming any rational understanding that Morrison's strategy was sound. But Victoria grasped his hands and made him understand that she needed to do this, that she couldn't spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder or wondering when the next attempt would come, that the only way forward was to face the threat head-on and end it permanently. The days leading up to the conference were tense and surreal, with Victoria maintaining her normal routine while surrounded by undercover officers, and knowing that people she had once trusted were actively planning her death. She found herself drawing strength from Michael in ways she never had from anyone before, his straightforward honesty and genuine concern providing an anchor when the weight of betrayal and danger threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. They spent their evenings together, talking about everything except the upcoming trap, creating a bubble of normalcy amid the gathering storm, discussing his plans to expand the shop with the steady income from the next tech contract, sharing dreams about a future that assumed Victoria would survive the coming confrontation, acknowledging without quite saying it directly that they were falling in love despite all the logical reasons why their relationship was improbable and complicated. On the night before the conference, Michael gave Victoria a simple silver chain with a small wrench pendant, a gift he had commissioned from a local jeweler using his own design. The symbolism was clear and touching, a reminder that while she lived in a world of high technology and billion-dollar valuations, she also had someone in her life who worked with his hands and fixed broken things, someone who would always be there to help her repair whatever needed mending. Victoria wore the necklace the next morning as she dressed for what could be the most dangerous day of her life. The small weight of the pendant against her chest, a tangible connection to the man who had saved her once, and whose love was giving her the courage to face danger again. The technology conference was held at the city's largest convention center, a gleaming modern facility filled with thousands of attendees, dozens of vendors, and enough electronic equipment to power a small city. Victoria took the stage for her keynote address with outward confidence, her silver dress catching the stage lights as she smiled at the audience of industry leaders and technology enthusiasts who had come to hear her speak about innovation and the future of artificial intelligence. But beneath her composed exterior, her heart hammered against her ribs as she scanned the crowd and the technical setup, knowing that somewhere in this controlled chaos were people who wanted her dead and law enforcement officers positioned to stop them. Detective Morrison was in the audience, disguised as a conference attendee, wearing casual business attire and an earpiece hidden beneath her hair, coordinating a team of undercover officers scattered throughout the venue. Michael watched from backstage, despite Morrison's recommendation that he stay away, unable to remain at a safe distance when Victoria was deliberately putting herself in danger, his hands clenched into fists as he monitored the security feeds that showed every angle of the auditorium. Victoria was 15 minutes into her presentation, discussing the ethical implications of machine learning algorithms, when Morrison received the signal she had been waiting for: movement from the suspects. Surveillance teams reported that David Ashford was in the lighting control booth, having talked his way past security using his family connection to Victoria and a fabricated story about wanting to surprise his cousin with a special visual effect during her speech. Simultaneously, Blackwood's hired consultant was spotted near the stage's electrical systems, carrying credentials that identified him as a licensed technician, authorized to be in restricted areas. Morrison immediately activated her response teams, officers converging on both locations, while others moved to secure Victoria and evacuate the auditorium if necessary. In the lighting booth, David was caught literally in the act of overriding the computerized system that controlled the massive LED screens behind the stage, reprogramming them to deliver a potentially lethal electrical surge through Victoria's microphone at a predetermined moment in her speech. Near the electrical panels, the consultant was apprehended while connecting a device that would have triggered the surge, while also creating a cascading power failure designed to look like an accidental malfunction rather than deliberate sabotage. The arrests happened so quickly and quietly that most conference attendees never realized anything unusual was occurring, with security personnel smoothly removing the suspects while Victoria continued her presentation as if nothing had changed. But Michael, watching the monitors backstage and receiving updates through his own borrowed earpiece, felt his knees go weak with relief when Morrison confirmed that both suspects were in custody and Victoria was no longer in danger. When Victoria concluded her keynote to thunderous applause, she walked off stage directly into Michael's arms, finally allowing herself to shake and cry as the adrenaline and fear she had been suppressing for days came flooding out. Morrison joined them moments later, her professional demeanor cracking into a satisfied smile as she informed them that both David Ashford and Marcus Blackwood had been arrested as well, picked up simultaneously at their respective offices now that their hired operatives were in custody and singing like canaries to save themselves from maximum sentences. The detective explained that the evidence was overwhelming. Recorded communications, financial transactions, the suspects literally caught in the act of attempted murder, and that all involved would face decades in prison for their conspiracy. The aftermath of the arrests unfolded over the following weeks as the legal system ground through preliminary hearings and bail denials, each court appearance revealing more details of the conspiracy that had nearly succeeded in killing Victoria. The media coverage was intense and sensational, with business reporters and crime journalists competing to tell the story of corporate rivalry turned deadly, of family betrayal and thwarted assassination, of the hero mechanic who had saved the day through simple awareness and quick action. Victoria handled the publicity with her characteristic grace, while privately struggling with the emotional toll of her cousin's betrayal and the reality of how close she had come to death. Michael found himself thrust into an uncomfortable spotlight, declining interview requests and refusing offers from publishers who wanted him to write a book about his experience, maintaining his simple philosophy that he had just done what needed to be done and didn't deserve special recognition for basic human decency. Together, they weathered the storm of attention, finding sanctuary in each other's company and in the quiet moments away from cameras and reporters, slowly beginning to heal from trauma and betrayal, while building something new and hopeful from the wreckage of violence and conspiracy. 3 months after the arrests, Victoria stood in a courtroom and watched as David Ashford and Marcus Blackwood were sentenced to 25 years in prison each, with additional time for their consultant who received 30 years for actually constructing and attempting to deploy the lethal devices. She felt no satisfaction in their punishment, only a deep sadness at the waste of it all. Talented people who had chosen destruction over creation, who had valued power and money over human life and family bonds. As Victoria left the courthouse, Michael was waiting for her on the steps, having taken the afternoon off from the shop to be present for this final chapter of the ordeal. They stood together, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold and amber, and Victoria realized that while she had nearly lost everything to violence and betrayal, she had also gained something infinitely precious: authentic connection with someone who loved her for herself rather than for what she could provide, someone who had proven his character in the most dramatic way possible, but who continued to prove it every single day through small acts of kindness and unwavering support. The nightmare was finally over, and real life, complicated, beautiful, uncertain real life, could finally begin. 6 months after the explosion that had brought them together, Victoria and Michael stood at a crossroads, both literal and metaphorical, looking at the empty building that would become their shared future. The property was in a neighborhood that existed between their two worlds, not the industrial district where Michael's shop struggled to survive, not the gleaming business district where Victoria's tower dominated the skyline, but rather a revitalizing area where old warehouses were being converted to mixed-use spaces and where different kinds of people were learning to coexist. Victoria had purchased the building using personal funds rather than corporate money, and together, she and Michael were transforming it into something that represented both of their values and dreams. The ground floor would house an expanded version of Torres Auto Repair, a state-of-the-art facility that would honor Michael's father's legacy while providing good jobs and honest service to the community. The upper floors would become a technology incubator focused on practical applications, where Victoria could mentor young entrepreneurs and invest in innovations that solved real problems rather than just chasing maximum profits. The transformation of the building paralleled the transformation of their relationship, which had evolved from the dramatic intensity of their initial connection into something deeper and more sustainable. They had learned to navigate their different worlds by creating a third space that belonged to both of them, finding balance between Victoria's need for intellectual stimulation and strategic thinking, and Michael's grounding in physical work and practical problem-solving. Victoria had begun spending time in the shop, not just visiting but actually learning basic automotive repair, discovering satisfaction in the tangible results of manual labor and the clear relationship between problem and solution. Michael had started attending business classes at the community college, not to become someone he wasn't, but to better understand the world Victoria navigated daily and to prepare himself to manage the expanded operation they were building together. Their friends and families had gradually accepted what had seemed impossible at first, that two people from completely different backgrounds could build something lasting based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine love, rather than on surface compatibility or conventional expectations. The grand opening of the new facility drew a crowd that perfectly illustrated the bridge they had built between their worlds. Michael's longtime customers stood alongside Next-Tech executives, neighborhood families mingled with technology journalists, and Victoria's mother chatted comfortably with the owner of the Mexican restaurant where Victoria and Michael had shared their first dinner. Detective Morrison attended, having become a friend during the investigation and trial, joking that she hoped never to work another case involving either of them, but grateful that her investigation had resulted in both justice and unexpected romance. During the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Victoria and Michael spoke together about their vision for the facility, a place where technology served human needs rather than the reverse, where different kinds of intelligence and skill were equally valued, where the boundaries between white-collar and blue-collar work became irrelevant in the pursuit of excellence and community benefit. The speech was short and heartfelt, lacking the polished corporate rhetoric that Victoria could deploy effortlessly, but that had never felt authentic. Instead, using simple language that reflected their shared belief that the best solutions came from combining different perspectives and refusing to accept artificial limitations. As the celebration continued around them, Victoria and Michael found a quiet moment together on the building's rooftop, looking out over the city that had tried to kill her and had given them both a second chance at finding authentic happiness. Michael produced a small box from his pocket, and Victoria's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a ring, not an ostentatious diamond that cost a fortune, but a beautifully crafted band of mixed metals, silver and copper intertwined in a pattern that symbolized their different backgrounds, creating something stronger together. He didn't make a speech or stage an elaborate proposal, just looked at her with those honest brown eyes and asked if she would marry him, if she was ready to make permanent this unlikely partnership that had begun with an explosion and evolved into the most real relationship either of them had ever experienced. Victoria said yes through tears of joy, sliding the ring onto her finger and kissing the man who had saved her life twice. once from a car bomb and once from the empty success that had defined her existence before fate had brought a grease-stained mechanic running into her path. The story that had begun with violence and near tragedy ended with hope and new beginnings, proving that sometimes the most unexpected connections are the ones that change everything. Michael Torres had saved Victoria Ashford from death, but she had saved him from a life of struggling isolation, and together they had saved each other from the limitations their different worlds had tried to impose on their possibilities. Their engagement made headlines, of course, with media outlets unable to resist the fairy tale narrative of the mechanic marrying the billionaire, but the real story was quieter and more profound. Two people who had chosen to see past surface differences to recognize essential compatibility, who had built trust through honesty rather than manipulation, who had proven that love could bridge any gap if both parties were willing to meet in the middle and create something new together. As they stood on that rooftop watching the sun set over their shared future, Victoria wearing Michael's ring and Michael wearing the confidence that came from being truly seen and valued, they both understood that the explosion had been just the beginning. The real miracle wasn't that Michael had noticed the danger or that Victoria had survived, but that two people from completely different worlds had been brave enough to build a bridge between them and wise enough to recognize that their differences made them stronger rather than weaker. Their story would inspire others who felt limited by circumstance or convention, reminding everyone who heard it that heroism comes in many forms and that sometimes the most courageous act is simply allowing yourself to love someone unexpected. And the most beautiful transformations happen not despite our differences, but because of them. If you enjoyed this amazing story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below, telling us where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. Your participation is essential for us to keep bringing stories that touch the heart. See you next time.